thing that I've found fascinating about like volcanoes is their ability to they don't happen very often, but they can have massive impacts on our life. Like, let's say the caldera that resides in Yellowstone that erupts every 200,000 years, I believe, and we're due. If that goes boom, we will experience like another ice age potentially because of all the debris that it would throw up into the atmosphere. I just think that things like that are fascinating. If you look through the historical record, there have been several eruptions that have been responsible for global cooling and a massive die off of animals. Like I just think that shit is fascinating. Are there any? I mean. In the caldera, I think I read something not that long ago that there was a slight elevation in activity during the time of COVID. Again, I could be misremembering this, but I'm wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, like no doubt, if Yellowstone or some similar volcano did produce, one of its infamous type of eruptions, it would shape humanity, definitely. But, I think the likelihood of that happening is very small, and we don't really like to talk about like volcanoes being due necessarily. But then in terms of, activity at Yellowstone, there were increases in thermal anomalies and maybe even a few earthquake swarms in the past couple of years. But that stuff is all like par. That the old remnants of the Yellowstone caldera is still an active volcano, and there's still magma underneath the surface there. But this is a caldera that's like tens of kilometers in diameter, and there's a lot of water there, and that water is hot, and those fluids that move around, as they're boiling or getting pushed around by different pressures, that all produces like the same types of seismicity that, you might see if there's magma. But we know that, because it's like very shallow and close to the surface, that this isn't a sign necessarily of a large reactivation of the entire magmatic system.
Okay, so that's not something that you guys are super worried about, is that caldera going boom? Like that's sort of like, do you guys have like a rating system for how probable or the likelihood of the different threats around the world, and if so, what would that be? Could you let us in on this secret?
Yeah, actually, and it's not a secret. And I don't have the specific ratings or numbers in front of me, and they're not off the top of my head. But you and your listeners, you can check out the National Volcano Early Warning System, NViews. It's a piece of legislation that was recently passed by Congress, and is just starting to get funding now. But the whole concept behind NViews is that the U.S. Geological Survey is making like a systematic, analysis of what is the probability that each particular volcano in the United States might erupt, how impactful would that eruption be, how much monitoring do we have now versus how much monitoring do we need. And all that stuff goes into this, threat score for the different volcanoes. And I don't actually know how Yellowstone ends up ranking in that threat score, but that would be something you guys could go look at. And that this whole concept of these like threat scores, that's something that the people at our office have talked about for a long time, and it's now finally starting to get formalized. But it's also the first step that we do with any of our foreign observatory partners. So like the team that I work on, we work with the observatory in Colombia and Indonesia and the Philippines and all these foreign countries. And we donate a lot of equipment to them and help work on projects. And before we ever start, the first thing we do, we call it a TAGA analysis, a threat assessment and gap analysis. So we ask the observatory to look at each volcano systematically, like what is the actual threat for these volcanoes and how much monitoring are we actually missing, so that we can, target our efforts better.
Yeah. You want to make, and what are the types of equipment that you're using to monitor these, like the seismology, the ground vibration? What does it look like? Is it, for some reason I picture someone sticking a bunch of probes in the ground. I could be way off base, but yeah, what's that look like?
The equipment that I wish I had one right here, I could show you. The equipment that we generally use, it's called a broadband seismometer, and it means it can reliably record ground vibrations anywhere between like 0.1 hertz up to like 50 hertz. And what it looks like, it's a metal cylinder that's maybe about like the size of your head, and they weigh maybe like 10 to 15, maybe 20 pounds, and they basically have 3 springs in them, one that is vertical and then 2 that are horizontal, that are perpendicular to each other. So with one of those seismometers, you can record 3 directions of ground movement, and you can get like the full motion of the earth as an earthquake wave travels past it. So that's like the standard sort of instrument that's used for monitoring across the world for permanent installs. But sometimes for temporary installs, these seismometers are much smaller, and they just have these 3 metal stakes and you just go stick them in the ground, for a couple months, and then you come pick them up.
All right.
It's not the highest quality data, but for a temporary deployment, it's good enough.
Yeah. And what kind of cases would you go out and deploy those? Would it be like in the uplift in the Sisters region? Is that where you would go out and deploy the temporary ones? Be like, hey, the ground is raising, some weird shit's going on. Let's go ahead and is that a pretty good scenario?
Yeah, that's one. Like new activity.
Mm-hmm.
New activity would be a scenario where we would go install temporary stations. We're not doing that at Sisters right now. I don't know the reasons exactly. But another reason would be planning. So at Mount Rainier, for example, in the next 5 years, they're hoping to augment that seismic network around Mount Rainier with the specific purpose of around Mount Rainier with the free flows that seasonally come off of the glaciers and sweep down through the park. So it's tricky to know where the best place to put a seismometer is, and these things are expensive, and it requires a lot of time and effort to install. So these past 2 summers, we've just been going out along the drainages and just sticking these things in the ground for a couple months at a time and figuring out like, all right, like where are the best places to install these things. But another thing you can look up in terms of temporary deployment are these things that we call spider deployments that we build at our offices, and we don't use them that often because they're tricky to handle. But during the 2004 eruption at Mount St. Helens, these are seismometers that just like sit on this like tripod, and They actually just like sling these things out on a helicopter and like drop them down on the volcano.
What?
And those things are set up to actually transmit the data back via radio or satellite. And they're not meant to last a long time. That's definitely a scenario where it's like, this volcano is very remote, it's newly active, and we want more equipment. So there are a couple different strategies.